Welcome back, everybody, to another week here at Filled Oak. We're just coming off a pretty long 6-week series going through the Sermon on the Mount. If you weren't able to check all those out, I just did want to remind you that they are going to be on Facebook, week 2 through 6. We didn't have week 1 on there, unfortunately, but just wanted to let you guys know. But before we get started, I want to go ahead and have a word of prayer as a congregation. So if you guys want to bow your heads. Dear Father, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be here, be in front of this congregation this morning. God, I pray that you would just be moving through not only my words and what I say, God, but in the hearts of each person here. God, I hope you just take this message and just give each person something that they need to hear, whether it be a little bit of the sermon, whether it be the whole sermon. God, I pray that you would just lay something from this message upon each person's heart. And I pray that they would just take that and use it for the rest of the week and just help them get through each week as we continue on here as a church. So thank you for this opportunity, and I pray that you would be here with us this morning. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, so today's message, we're not going to be in Matthew. Shocker. We've been in there for so long. We're actually going to be in the book of 1 John, chapter 2, verse 15. Now, the easiest way to get there is turn to Revelations and go back about a couple pages. It's the easiest way to get there. But so that's the message today. Now, I don't know if any of you follow me on Facebook, but if you don't, I encourage you to, because I try to give a little teaser or a little caption or word that we're going to be talking about. If you were following me on Facebook, you would have seen a picture of this book. Can everybody read the title of this book? Now, the title says, Sermons for the Space Age. And my question was, how does that impact my sermon for today? Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume most of you guys don't like reading 50-year-old sermon books. I, on the other hand, do. That's something I like to do. So I saw this book in the library, and I kind of laughed because, we're not in the space age. It looks like it was written in the 1900s. It was in fact written in the 1960s. But I saw it and I knew I had to pick it up and read it. So this past week I was reading it, well, a little over this past week, I was reading it and I was going through it, and it kind of cracked me up because this guy, Mr. Jones, Mr. E. Ray Jones, these are his sermons from the 1960s, and they were all about this upcoming space age. This idea of interplanetary travel and, everybody having their own rocket ship to just, go to Mars whenever they wanted. And the whole point, he was trying to reach these people so when they went into the space age, they would remember who Jesus is. And it's kind of funny because in some points, he's right on. In some points, he's talking about they're still, they're happening today. But there's other times when he talks about a quote from Mr. Leo Sheeran, director of the Research Institute of America. And this was in about the 1960s, and he was quoting this man, and he was talking about the future, and it was one of his first sermons, and it kind of started the book out about what the book was going to be like. So in the 1960s, this man, Leo Sheeran, he was talking about the future, and he was asked, or he gave a quote on what his prediction for the next 10 years was going to be like. So I wanted to share with you and see what you guys think. So he said, in the next 10 years, income will be up 20%. He said, you will be down to a 4-day work week and probably a guaranteed salary. He said, you will own 2 of the 81 million automobiles on the highway, and more than likely one of those will be jet propelled. Your house will be heated and lighted by the sun. The built-in cooking units will be hidden cleverly behind closed doors. Automatic eyes will open and close the windows as the temperature and the weather change. Plastic cans, they'll be common. Pre-cooked meats will be common. And even microwave cooking methods will be common. But Mr. Jones said perhaps the most astounding prediction of all from Mr. Sheeran is one that we know is well within the realm of possibility. And that is in 10 years there will be interplanetary travel in space on a regular schedule. Now, unless any of you were visiting Mars or Jupiter or Pluto, this week. I think he kind of missed the mark on that one. But he kind of got the mark on a couple of them. You know, microwave cooking ovens, more than likely all of us have used that this week or used it sometime here soon. And he had these predictions. Some of them were spot on, like I said. Some of them kind of underestimated. Some of them kind of overestimated. But one of the things, the reason he used this quote is because Mr. Jones, the writer of this book, believed that Mr. Sheeran's quote was what he was going to base his sermons around. That in the next 10 years there will be interplanetary travel in space on a regular schedule. So this quote was in the 60s. So that meant in the 70s he was assuming there'd be interplanetary travel. Now he wasn't all wrong. If you guys know anything about the 1960s, you'll know that it was the space race. Now, I'll share an interesting fact with you. Before I decided I wanted to become a preacher, I actually wanted to be a history teacher. I love history. And when I was a little child, the History Channel was my favorite channel. You know, National Geographic, I loved it. So when I read this book, when I read that quote, I knew around that time there was a thing called the space race. And what had happened is we were in the middle of the Cold War. The Soviet Union, you know, versus America. And in 1957, the Soviet Union released the first satellite into orbit, Sputnik. And it was a worldwide hit. You know, people in America, people all over the world were looking up to the skies and seeing new possibilities. You know, they had that saying, the sky is the limit, but now the sky is not even the limit. You know, space is the limit. So then in the early 1960s, 1961, JFK said, by the end of the decade, by the end of 1960, before 1970, he wanted a man on the moon. He wanted America to have a man on the moon. And the reason he did this is because he didn't want the Soviet Union to think that they were better than America. You know, they kind of surprised America with putting Sputnik up into orbit. But they said, well, we want to make sure everyone knows that we're, you know, superior. So JFK made this announcement that he wanted to have a man on the moon. And a little bit after that, they were already having you know, trials and tests into outer space. And as I'm sure most of you know, in 1969, my mother was, we landed on the moon. Now, I always remember we landed on the moon in 1969 because that was the year my mom was born. And I hope that doesn't make you feel old. But in 1969, America finally cemented its place on top of the world. They had landed a man on the moon. You know, what else could they do? And it kind of peaked at the space race. It kind of showed everybody, all right, you know, you guys are good. Yeah, you got Sputnik into outer space, but we just landed a man on the moon. You know, it was a worldwide thing, and everybody was talking about it each day. You know, talking about this idea of, are we going to have a man on the moon? Or, you know, I heard America say they were going to have it next year or next year. But in 1969, we finally landed on the moon. And a little bit after that, the space race kind of started to fizzle away. In the early 1970s, the USA and the Soviet Union combined to have a joint task force for outer space adventures, so to say. And then in 1975, I believe, they finally had their first joint program into outer space. And after that, the race kind of fizzled away. They were kind of on the same team. There was no really a race in sight. That didn't mean the program died away. There were still plenty of trips to the moon. Well, not plenty. There were a few trips to the moon. You know, we still were putting people into outer space. But the race kind of fizzled away. It really hasn't been the same since then. But Mr. Sheeran, with his 10-year goal, looked all around him and he said, you know, this idea of the space race, everybody's talking about it in the 1960s. Everybody's excited, you know, all these new possibilities. And Mr. Sheeran looked at the world and he said, this is how much I think the world is going to get better. This is how much better the world is going to be than it is now. And he laid out these predictions. And the whole reason he made these predictions was based on what was happening around the world, what was happening around him during that time. But I want to share with you the passage for today. 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. It says, "Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For everything in the world, the cravings of sinful man, the lust of his eyes, the boasting of what he has and does, comes not from the Father, but from the world. The world and its desires pass away, but the man who does the will of God lives forever." So that's the section we're talking about today, but I want to first talk about that first verse there in 15. It says, "Do not love the world. Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him." That's a strange verse. Do not love the world. You know, we were talking about this space race, and that was the thing the whole world was talking about. Now, how do we not love the world? It's a great place. God is doing great things in the world. We have people in the world that we love. Our family, our friends, our church friends. We love people in the world, but how do we not love the world? Isn't that the whole reason God sent Jesus? God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, so that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. One of the most well-known scriptures in the Bible. So what does it mean here? What is John trying to say? Do not love the world. Well, let's see. He goes on in the next verse, and he lays out what the world is. He says, "For everything in the world, the cravings of sinful man, the lust of his eyes, the boasting of what he has and does, comes not from the Father, but from the world." So now we have a little bit better understanding of what the world is. It's not just the planet. It's not just Earth. It's not even just the universe. It's what the world bases itself on. During the 60s, the world was basing their life upon the space race. And it wasn't a bad thing. We got a man on the moon. There were people walking on the moon. That is a crazy thing. That is something only with God's help that people could do. So I don't think John would say the space race was a bad thing. Well, if John was in the space race, he probably would have been blown out of his mind anyways, because he would have had no clue what was going on. But John's not saying necessarily that the idea of the space race was bad, that people trying to go after passions, trying to push the limits was a bad thing. What he's saying is the things that can turn our hearts away from God. I use this idea of the space race because behind the reason that we did it was essentially so that America could boast to the world about what we had done. In 1957, we saw the Soviet Union launch Sputnik, and we said, no. We are definitely not going to be outdone by the Soviet Union. That's just not a thing. We have to show the world how good we are. But John says here, boasting of what he has and does. Not only did we boast of what we had done, landed a man on the moon, we boasted that we were the first country to do it. So it's not necessarily that the space race was a bad thing. It was a pretty cool thing. I really like that era in history. People were doing a lot of cool things. But when we start letting the things of the world dictate our mindset, that's what John is saying we should be careful. The quote I gave you from Mr. Sheeran, the Research Institute of America, the reason he made that prediction was not because of God. It wasn't because of his belief or his faith. It was because of what the world was around him. But that's not always the best idea. You see, more than likely you guys were not talking about the space race this week or this past month. You probably might have been talking about the meteor shower that was coming through space, but that was probably the only time you really talked about what was going on. But I can almost guarantee you probably talked about something like the Olympics. You probably stayed up till 3 a.m. like I did, watching gymnastics and swimming, two things I've never done and still don't understand. But it's just this idea of the Olympics. It's cool. You know, it only happens, the Summer Olympics only happens every 4 years. You got to make sure you're doing it. You got to make sure you're talking about it. But once again, we can easily fall into the cravings of sinful man, the lust of the eyes, the boasting of what we have or what we do. I saw on Twitter last night a table of the total of awards. And America was number one in all three. They had the most gold, they had the most silver, and they had the most bronze medals. And the person was just saying, like, look how great America is. And yeah, we're pretty good at the Olympics. We did really good. But if we let that start taking hold of our lives, if that's what we start, boasting about, then we start to turn away from God. Now, if you watch the Olympics, you might see some outfits that the men or the women are wearing that are kind of, risque or something. They're kind of a little too small, a little too thin on the material. And it's easy to start watching that and, forget about God. And John says, the lust of the eyes. It's just another thing that gets our hearts and our minds away from who God is. See, people were consumed with this idea in the 1960s of the space race. They made it their goal to get on the moon. And because of that, especially in America, more than likely, you would have been talking about it, every week, if not at least every month. Updating America's space program, seeing how they're doing, maybe seeing how the Soviet Union was doing, where they closed. But I'm going to go out on a limb, correct me if I'm wrong, but you probably didn't care about America's space program in this last week. I didn't even think about it until I started reading this book. I didn't even know what the space program was doing. It's just because it wasn't that important to me. It's not really important to our society right now. We've sent some satellites into space, but landing on the moon, it's not really that big deal anymore. We've kind of done it, but it's kind of passed away. But you see, there's things in all of our lives. When I was doing research on this, I came across a commentary, and it was talking about these sins that John lists. The cravings of sinful man, the lust of eyes, and his boasting of what he has and what he does. And he was talking about in the first century, they wouldn't have had to deal with maybe the sinful things that a TV can have. Or maybe the sinful things that a phone with Wi-Fi can have. But they weren't dealing with that. That wasn't a sin that they were committing. They would have had no clue about the space race or boasting in America. There wasn't even America. So the sins might not be the same that John is talking about. You might not be committing the same sins that he's talking about. But the commentary said the temptations never change. The lust of man, the cravings of sinful man, the boasting. They were around in the first century. They're going to be around today, tomorrow. As long as we're on the earth, they're going to be around. They're going to be around as long as they've been on earth because they've been around since humanity. Adam and Eve, they ate the fruit. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, if you eat a fruit this week, you're probably not going to, kick a bunch of people out of the Garden of Eden. But that was, in fact, what Adam and Eve did. They ate the fruit, and everybody got kicked out. We were mortal. We're living in this world today because of that. But the sin is not the same. The sin that you commit might not be the same, but the temptation to go against God's word is always going to be around since Adam and Eve. But why did I bring up the space age? Why did I bring up this crazy old-looking book, Sermons from the Space Age? The reason here is in verse 17. Verse 17 says, "The world and its desires pass away, but the man who does the will of God lives forever." The space age has passed away. I joke around with my friends this week, the past couple of weeks. My friend actually got this book, and we were laughing about it. It's so laughable because, he was expecting, at least before the 1980s, that we were going to be, having a school on Jupiter. We were going to be going to Mars for the grocery. It's pretty laughable reading it. He had all these big plans. And all these big plans were placed, or they were based upon what was going on in the world. Now, if I were to ask you, give me a list of the things that you think are going to be changed in 10 years. There would probably be a lot of things, and it probably wouldn't necessarily be similar to Mr. Sheeran's listing. But it would be changed. It would be affected by what's going on in the world. The politics, what's going on in your personal life, what's going on overseas, what's going on here in America. The predictions that you have for the future would all be based on what's going on right now. And as laughable as some of Mr. Sheeran's predictions could be, one in particular, the jet-propelled car, he was up on that idea, but that's just laughable to us now. We have a car, but it definitely doesn't have jet fuel in it. But the reason that it's laughable, the reason that if you read this book you would laugh at the things he's predicting, is because they passed away. And John even predicted it. He said the world and its desires pass away. They pass away. In a couple years, we're not going to care about the Summer Olympics. We're going to care about the Winter Olympics. My favorite. But, we're not really going to care about what happened in the 2016 Olympics. That's because those things pass away. 50 years ago, almost 50 years ago, when this book was written, that was all the rage. The space age was all the rage, but they wouldn't have known anything about the 2016 Olympics. They didn't care what was going on in the 1700s. What they cared about was the space race, because that's what was going on in their life. But John reminds us that although we get focused on these things, although we get, caught up in the Olympics, caught up in the space race, even caught up in our personal lives, boasting about our house, loving our cars, loving the land that we have, loving the items that we own that people may not own. When we get consumed with worldly things, we forget that they'll pass away. There's a song I was listening to. It was talking about the verse in the Bible, the things you have will rust. The things will moth, everything will fade away. You might have this nice new car, but in 30 years it might be a rusted thing that you couldn't even get $5 out of. It just passed away. But John says there's one thing that will never pass away, and it'll be here forever. And that thing is the man who does the will of God. The man who does the will of God will live forever. Now, John isn't just talking to the men. He's talking to both men and women. So both the men and women who do the will of God will live forever. So in your life, when you feel yourself getting caught up in things, and I know you do, because I do. Even this week, I get caught up in doing my own thing. I get caught up in, taking pride in different things. I get caught up in myself. And we start floating away from doing the will of God. Don't just think it's something in your life. Don't just think it's something that only you deal with. We all deal with it. But John warns us here, don't get too caught up. And whatever the desire is, whatever the pull, whatever it is, the pull towards sin, the temptation that you have in your personal life, whatever it is, don't let it pull you into worldly things. Because when the worldly things go away, in 40-something years, when they're laughing at what you thought was something serious, you're going to look back and realize there's been one thing that whole time that has never passed away, that has never been laughable, that has never been overthrown. And that's Jesus Christ. And that's the faith we have in him through God. People surely laugh at us today. They've laughed at Christians since Jesus Christ died. Even when Jesus Christ was alive, they laughed at Christians. But the Bible and Jesus Christ's life, it's still not laughable. It's still not out of date. I was joking that this book is sort of out of date, but it's not yet in date either. It's out of date because they had no clue what 2016 was actually going to be like. But it's not yet in date because it's talking about planetary travel. But the Bible that we have today, the reason that the Bible was created, the people that the Bible talk about, the Son of God, Jesus Christ, who we follow, he will always be in date. He's never going to go out of date. He's never going to fade away. But I want you guys to just remember that. You know, each day we struggle with putting things before God. Whether it's the Olympics going on right now, whether it's your house, your bills, your payments, your finances, your cars, your land, your boat, your four-wheeler. And when you put those things before God, when you start doing those things instead of doing the will of God, then you're risking to just be passed over, to just pass away with the worldly desires. So John tells us here, the only way to live forever, the only thing that in 40-something years won't be laughable, won't be out of date, is the actions that we do the will of God with. Now, the will of God in each person's life is different. What you might be called to do, what God might be calling you to do, might be completely different than what he's calling me to do. And that's kind of on purpose. You're not supposed to have my goals. I'm not supposed to have your goals. But ultimately, it all comes down to, are we following God? Are we doing the will of God? And this week, my challenge to you is to just assess your life. You know, if you start feeling yourself, pulling towards something, just step back and ask yourself, are you truly following the will of God? Are you truly doing the will of God? Or are you just getting caught up in things that in a couple of years people will laugh at because you thought it was so serious? This Sermons for the Space Age, this collection of sermons, they were written about a laughable subject that we talk about today. This idea of interplanetary space travel, it's laughable. But the reason that this book still helped me this Sunday for my sermon is the reason that it was written. It wasn't written because of the space age. It was written to reach people for Christ. So my challenge for you guys is just to decide this week. Are you doing things because the world is going on around you, the things of the world are calling you to it? Or are you pushing past the worldly things? Are you truly following the will of God? We're going to have a time of invitation here. If you haven't committed yourself to God, if you haven't committed yourself to Christ, then this is the time we just offer it up. We're going to have a song here, and if you want to take this time to just come up here and talk to me or talk to someone else just about what it means to be a follower of Christ, and I encourage you to. So guys, I just challenge you. Today, as you listen to this song, as you go out from here this week, ask yourself, are you following the will